10th time that day that she was still with him when the doorbell rang. He paused to cut the sandwich in half, thinking about how she would have described it as good eaten with her playful accent. After wiping his hands on a kitchen towel, he walked to the door, curious about who might be visiting him on a Wednesday afternoon. He wasn't expecting any packages, and it felt too early for the missionaries who usually came to his neighborhood. Being a Sunday, he didn't expect to see anyone else unless he went out. So a ring at the door was quite surprising. When he opened the door, he found two young people standing there, a brother and a sister. They both had light blonde hair, and it was clear they were related. They wore shy smiles, trying to make a good impression. But what startled him was their eyes, one brown and one blue, just like his. When the young woman said in a strong British accent, "Hello, Dad. It's nice to meet you," he felt everything inside him collapse. "Are you sure you're okay?" Amelia asked, clearly worried. Brett sat on the couch, his head in his hands, struggling to understand what was happening. Amelia stood over him, using the same kitchen towel, now damp, to wipe his forehead. "I told you I'm fine," Brett replied, trying to sound strong. "You just surprised me, that's all." "I said we should have called first," the young man said, introducing himself as Bradley right after they helped Brett up from the doorstep and into the house. They both sounded very British, with a clear and crisp accent that Brett associated with fancy shows and memories of Fiona, the Lady Fiona Birmingham Hart, daughter of a duke. But here they were. He had suspected something might happen. He had thought about reaching out, but that hadn't been their agreement. He knew there was no chance for a future. Fiona had her own responsibilities and commitments, and he loved her enough to respect her wishes for no contact, no matter how hard it was. He doubted his heart could handle seeing her again anyway. It was better to let things be, to live and let love from a distance. For years he had nursed his broken heart, finding new places, jobs, and even brief relationships until he met Caroline. It turned out she had her own emotional struggles, just like he did. They held on to each other tightly, like two pieces of debris in a storm, trying to find safety and create a life together. Their relationship wasn't fiery, but rather comforting. He cared for her, and he believed she cared for him too. It was more about companionship than the intense feelings he had experienced with someone else, even if that had been just for a short time. And now they faced a truth he had never fully embraced. He shifted in his seat and looked up. He needed to manage this unexpected moment. He gave them a small, wry smile, and they looked back with concern. The expression on Bradley's face was something he had seen in his own reflection before. He glanced at Amelia and noticed how much she looked like her mother. "I'm really sorry about that. I'm not usually so emotional. You just surprised me. I'm all right now, just feeling my age." Amelia chuckled and sat down. "You're 51, Dad. You've got plenty of time ahead, as strong as ever. Or so Mom says." "I think he could use a drink," Bradley said, as he looked around the room for interesting bottles. His face lit up when he spotted a small collection on the side table. It held a mix of bottles from the countries he had visited during his time at sea, along with some fine Irish and Scottish whiskeys. He never quite figured out whether it was whiskey or whiskey. It seemed to depend on who he was speaking to. "I know I could use one," he added, moving to the table to check the bottles. "You think everyone needs a drink?" Amelia exclaimed, then glanced at Bradley, her tone softening. "Though in this case we could probably all use something to relieve the tension, even if it is a little early." "You look so much like your mother," Brett said with a touch of nostalgia. Gaining his composure, he stood up. "But how rude of me. You come here, and I haven't offered you anything. It's lunchtime, and I was just about to have a sandwich. Would you like something?" Bradley looked up thoughtfully from the drinks. "What are you having?" "Brett," Amelia said sharply. "What? If it sounds good, I'm definitely in. I'm still a bit off from the jet lag. What are you having, Dad?" "Dad? Right, that's me," Brett thought. "A tuna sandwich. It's a recipe from Caroline. Tuna mixed with mayo with some sweet corn and green onion. It's really good." "Oh, that sounds delicious," Bradley said, smiling at Brett. "I'd love some of that." "And you, Amelia?" Brett asked, looking at his daughter. "Should I call you Amelia, or do you have another name you prefer?" Amelia returned a broad smile, just like Bradley's, showing her large teeth and a little gap between her front teeth, a feature she shared with her mother. "My family calls me Millie," she said shyly. "I'd really like it if you did too." Brett felt a weight lift from his shoulders as he saw her true wish. Suddenly, she stood up and wrapped her arms around him tightly, giving him a warm hug. "I'm sorry. We didn't know about you. We didn't even know you existed. Mom only told us a few weeks ago, and it took a long time to find you. I'm really sorry. We just want to know you, to understand who you are." Her words spilled out quickly, mixed with tears. "It's okay, Millie. You're here now. I should be the one to apologize. I wasn't around. There was a reason for it, and I'm sure your mother explained. But please, let me." Before he could finish, another arm joined the hug, and Bradley was there too. He didn't say a word, but a few tears rolled down his face, showing the feelings he was trying to hide. "We have all the time we need to catch up. You're here now," Brett whispered, unsure about what his life would look like moving forward. But surely it couldn't get worse. After lunch, Brett finished his drink and let out a satisfied burp. Then he realized he was aware of not just his guest, but their standing in the world. He pursed his lips and looked away and then back, determined not to feel small in his own home because of his own children. Amelia watched with a smile, and when Bradley burped in the same way, she laughed. It was clear these were definitely his children. Feigning disgust, Amelia turned away. "Men, such slobs. Did we at least wash our hands before diving into food? At least I can see where he gets that from." Bradley looked at Brett, shrugging his shoulders as if to say, "What can you do?" Brett winked back at him. "I'm just happy it wasn't a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. That's what you Americans eat, right?" Amelia asked, turning back to Brett. "Well, sometimes. Have you never tried one? I'm sure I have some around here." Brett replied, putting on an exaggerated accent. She simply smiled, and Bradley finished his drink, making slurping noises. "You know, people at home don't think much of your beers, but this one was actually nice. What was it called?" "Anchor Steam. It's made in San Francisco, and it's one of my favorites. I think we'll need to get a case before we head back," Bradley said, nodding in appreciation. "So," said Amelia, getting up to clear the plates, "I guess you want to know why we are here? Why Mom finally told us about you?" "I'm guessing it has something to do with the Duke's passing," Brett suggested, watching as Amelia put the plates in the sink and walked to the fridge to grab more bottles. "Exactly," Bradley replied, giving Amelia a nod as she handed him a bottle. "Mom finally told us the truth after the funeral. Upon finding out about you, we reviewed her notes, did some digging to locate where you live, and quickly booked a flight. We needed to meet the man who—" He stopped, his cheeks slightly flushed. "Right," said Brett with a hint of sarcasm. He wasn't ready to have that conversation with his kids. "I guess you want to know the whole story?" "Of course. We have a few questions. For example, is there any health history we should be aware of? Do we have a family history of heart problems?" Amelia got straight to the point, which made Brett chuckle. It was one of his traits. "Not that I know of. The only thing I've heard about is a pattern of mental health issues that have come and gone through the family. My uncle and dad both had their struggles and passed away in care facilities. This has been happening for 5 generations. It seems to skip every other one. So it might show up in your generation. Maybe something like mad cow?" There was a brief pause before Amelia and Bradley both burst into laughter. "Oh, that's a good one. You almost had me there," Amelia said, giggling. Brett couldn't help but laugh, too. It felt nice, natural, something that had been missing since Caroline had passed. "But yes, we'd like to hear the story. Mom didn't share much, just that you were the best 10 days of her life," Amelia said, making quote gestures with her fingers and rolling her eyes. The idea of Mom having exciting moments at sea is hard to imagine. She's not usually one for big displays of emotion unless one of us is in danger. Hearing her talk about you was a real surprise, let me tell you. "Shall we sit in the living room? The chairs there are comfy, and the view is amazing," Brett suggested, thinking about how much he should reveal. How much do kids really want to know about their parents' past? "Yes, let's do that," Amelia said, getting up with Bradley close behind. They carried their drinks into the spacious room, which featured large windows that offered a stunning view of the cliff and the calm Pacific Ocean. Clouds floated overhead, and they could see surfers trying to catch waves under the afternoon sun, showcasing the beauty of the North San Diego coastline. "Great view," Bradley noted as they settled into a couch and an easy chair, positioned perfectly for the scenery. Brett shrugged. He had always enjoyed it, but it had become familiar over time. On stormy days, though, he loved to relax in the easy chair and watch the lightning dance and the waves crash. More than once he had woken up late at night with a warm blanket draped over him. Caroline had tucked him in and left him there to think about the past, with a glass of whiskey and a large glass of water on the table nearby. "Did you say reports? That your mom had?" he asked. "Yes," replied Bradley. "She checked in on you every couple of years, just to see how you were doing. Honestly, I think she always loved you. When she spoke about you, she seemed full of life. Apparently you were hard to find after you left Chicago." "I'm not surprised by that," he said. "I figured she might have done something like that. When I married Caroline, we received an anonymous wedding gift. It was 5 diamonds, very nice ones. They helped with the down payment on our home. I thought it might have been her reaching out in her own way, even if it wasn't direct." Brett took a big drink of his beer to hide his feelings. When he first realized where the gift likely came from, he had a strong urge to reach out, but he had made promises to Fiona and to his new wife. It didn't feel right to make contact. Still, he felt uneasy for days about it. "Did you tell your wife where you thought they were from?" Amelia asked, looking curious. She sat on the couch, legs tucked under her, pushing some stray hair behind her ear, reminding Brett of her mother. He looked away, trying to keep his emotions in check. "Yes, we had no secrets. She knew I was hurting. She was also dealing with her own struggles, as your mother's letters might have mentioned. We were similar in many ways, and we helped each other heal. Caroline meant as much to me as your mother did. I don't know if I would have made it this far without her kindness and support. I respected her too much to hide things, and she understood. It was wonderful how she could see beyond the pain and help me find myself again. I owe her everything. I'm sorry. We didn't come here to upset you or disrespect your relationship, Dad. I know this might be a surprise from the past, but we are just grateful to be here. We understand you have your own life and we're not trying to pull you into ours. We just wanted to get to know you," Bradley said, concerned about how strongly Brett had spoken. "It's okay, son." He finally said those words. This was his son. He struggled to understand how being a dad worked. "I've had a life since your mother, and I won't apologize for that. Caroline was amazing, and we built a wonderful life together. But she's gone now, and I need to create a new life, one without her. But I'll always remember her and what she did for me." After Brett's words, there was a brief silence. The soft sound of ocean waves and the steady ticking of a clock were the only things breaking the quiet. He could see that both children were trying to think of what to say next. They were eager to learn about their mother, so he decided to help them out. "Your mother was special too, in ways I can't fully explain, unless you've loved someone like that. Well. So how did you meet?" one of them asked. Brett closed his eyes for a moment, recalling a memory of Fiona. He remembered her standing at the door of his cabin, looking both charming and confident, holding a bottle of wine in a plastic glass, tilting her head with a playful smile as she asked, "See anything you like?" Then he began to share his story. "I was 24. I had been at sea with the U.S. Merchant Marine for almost 6 years, starting from my 18th birthday. My parents passed away when I was 17, and I had few options. School was not my thing. I was more interested in girls, music, and just having fun. College was not realistic for an orphan without money. I tried to join the Navy back then, wanting to protect the world, but they wouldn't accept me. I had gotten in trouble for selling some weed when I was 17, right after losing my parents. With a record like that, I had to ask for special permission to join the armed forces, and they turned me down. Looking back, it was probably for the best. I wouldn't have fit in very well, but I wasn't ready to give up. I signed on with a ship, an oil tanker called the Pearly White. What a name that was. I moved from one contract to another. Some ships kept you for a certain period, like 6 months, while others hired you for specific journeys. I drifted from ship to ship since I had no place to call home. I grew up in Atlanta and always wanted to see the ocean, so there I was. One of the ships I worked on was an older container ship, the Lady Grey. It wasn't the newest vessel, but it did the job. By that time, I was skilled at my work and was planning to aim for a higher position when I got to port next. We were headed to Hong Kong from Argentina. We weren't rushing. We were fully loaded and had lost a couple of containers during a storm at the start of our journey. Brett noticed the surprised looks on both Bradley and Amelia's faces. Oh, it's no big deal. This kind of thing happens more often than you might expect. All the containers need good insurance, and when you pay to be on the lower levels of the ship, it usually costs more. If you pay the least, you end up on the top where it can be riskier. That's part of the shipping container business. Anyway, we were about 10 days away from Hong Kong. It's better to stay close to the coast of the Pacific if possible, rather than going straight across the ocean. If something goes wrong, it's easier to reach land, or to have help come to you quickly. You only take the shortcut if you're in a hurry. We got a call that day, a general warning to stay alert. I was on bridge duty and I remember it clearly. You don't get those warnings often. There are many rules to follow when you do get one. We had to slow down, turn the radar up to full, have lookouts watch carefully, and coordinate with other ships nearby. So we slowed down, even though the captain wasn't happy. He was worried about his bonus that depended on our schedule. But there are maritime laws we must follow, and we had no choice. Luckily, we had just avoided a big storm that passed through about a week earlier. Those storms are tough. Apparently someone had been sailing in that area and they hadn't been heard from since the storm, which raised concerns. Someone important. As it turned out, my friend Marcus was the one who spotted the boat. We noticed something small on the radar that didn't answer our radio calls. We decided to change course and lowered the small boat we had to check it out. And sure enough, there it was, a very damaged small sailboat with no mast or sails. It was missing almost everything. It had no way to move, and it looked like it had been through a lot. Many things that weren't secured were gone, and some that were secured were missing too. The whole boat was pretty much wrecked. It was barely floating. There were some scraps of canvas set up to catch rainwater, so it was clear that the water tanks had been damaged. Everything about it seemed desperate. We were shouting and blowing the horn as we got closer, and there was no sign of life, so we feared the worst. Clearly someone had made it through the storm because of those rain catchers, but they might not have survived afterward. Without clean water, survival is tough after a few days. I was the first one on board since I had some medical training for container ships. I found your mother in the main cabin lying on a makeshift hammock. She looked weak and was barely conscious. The room was mostly flooded and everything was floating around our feet. We quickly grabbed her and took her to the small boat. We hooked the boat up and used a small pump to start taking the water out of the cabin. We thought there might be something in the boat that she would want later, so it was easier to take it with us. She was in bad shape as I carried her. She wore torn pants and a white top, with the arms cut off to make a headscarf. She looked dehydrated. Her tongue was swollen and her lips were chapped. Luckily, she hadn't had much sun exposure since she stayed below deck when the sun was strong. That was a smart choice. It took us about 2 hours to get back to the container ship. Pulling the damaged boat along made things harder, and the pump was working hard to get rid of the water that kept pouring in. When we finally reached the container ship, it was clear that the boat would not last much longer. I carried our tired passenger up to the medical bay, while our chief engineer jumped into the boat and hurried to grab things from inside. The pump wasn't managing well and the boat was likely going to sink soon. We managed to salvage a lot of items, personal belongings, and some waterlogged supplies. There was no use trying to save any electronics, as we had similar things on our ship, and most were ruined anyway. We collected charts, clothes, a few books, and as many sealed containers as we could find. It took about 45 minutes for the boat to sink completely. We all stood there, silently watching it disappear. No sailor enjoys watching another boat sink. It brings bad luck and the realization that someone, somewhere, has lost a boat and maybe a home. I made sure our passenger was comfortable and set up an IV to give her some fluids and a calming medicine. She needed to rest. I checked her carefully, and aside from a big bruise on her left hip and side of her head and a deep cut on her forearm, she didn't seem to have serious injuries. We had a medical bay on the ship, but it wasn't quite a hospital. It had a small bed for basic care, but it wasn't really set up for staying long. Next to that area was an extra berth, where I moved her to rest. She was a bit out of it and confused. She knew we had rescued her and that she was no longer on her yacht. But beyond that, she wasn't making much sense. She really needed fluids, protein, and most importantly, uninterrupted sleep. When I spoke with the captain to update him on her condition, he grumbled a bit and then ordered the engines to go full speed ahead. I could see he was determined to make up for lost time and his missed bonus. He had been with the company for over 17 years and only had 4 years left until full retirement. He was excited about that. He had shared pictures of the cabin he planned to have on the Norwegian coast for when he retired. It was clear his fondness for the sea had faded, and like a relationship gone quiet, he was just waiting to move on to something better. He told me he had contacted the office about the Discovery, described her situation, and was advised to keep going unless her injuries were severe, which he now knew they were not. He was to head straight to the port in Hong Kong. She would be taken ashore there, hopefully feeling better. Brett paused to take a drink. Talking made him thirsty. Since Caroline had passed away, he wasn't used to much conversation. He mostly listened these days radio, podcasts, TV, anything to make the house feel lived in. Caroline had always filled their life with activity, making sure there was something to discuss. Now that she was gone, everything felt quieter. He looked at Amelia and Bradley. They were hanging on his every word, their eyes bright with interest. This was a story he had hinted at but never fully shared with them. They wanted to hear it. So, he continued, his gaze shifting to the calm sea outside the window. She slept for the next 12 hours. I moved to the cabin next to hers for a while. We had 6 passenger cabins on the ship, used for company officers or guests when needed. These cabins were small and didn't have balconies or the luxuries of a cruise ship, but they did have a little TV and a radio. The ship also had a small library with about 30 or 40 movies and shows, a mix of English and other films. People would bring and take movies, so it was always changing. Remember, this was 25 years ago. There were no DVDs or Wi-Fi back then. Everything was on videotape or in physical books. We even had a lending library for books, filled with magazines and plenty of thrillers and spy stories. So, I picked a book and settled into the cabin next door. The captain made it clear that taking care of her was my responsibility. While some of the crew showed interest and stopped by to check on her, most had their own jobs to focus on. You might think there wouldn't be much to do on a ship carrying containers to another port, but you would be surprised. Ships like that require a lot of regular care to ensure they work well and that the emergency equipment is ready if needed. There's a lot involved in operating a container ship, just like there is with an oil tanker, a cruise ship, or any active boat. Like I said, your mother slept for 12 hours straight, completely out of it. I left her door a little open so I could hear if she moved or called out, and I managed to get 7 hours of sleep myself, which surprised me. But then I heard her calling out in that fancy voice she has. She was saying, "Hello? Is anyone there?" And she sounded much more together, so I hurried from my room to hers. I can tell you right now, kids, I was struck by her the moment I walked into that room. I've had my fair share of crushes before, but this was something real. You know what your mother looks like, but at that moment she was so young and full of life. Her skin was perfect, her deep auburn hair shone, her eyes sparkled, and she had beautiful eyebrows and soft lips. Just, wow. He looked at the kids and saw their expressions change. He realized who he was talking about. This was their mother, in a way they might not have expected, and he could tell it made them a bit uneasy. No child wants to hear about their parent in ways that might make them uncomfortable. For the first time, it struck him that he was about to share a story that might change how they viewed their mother. He felt he needed to ask. "Hey, what I'm sharing, this might be tough to hear, right? This could change how you see your mom, and I don't want that." "Are you sure you want to hear this?" he asked, shifting a little in his chair. Amelia scoffed, and Bradley smiled. "Yeah. Hearing this is only going to make us see her better. She hasn't been the most exciting person growing up, Dad. The most animated we've seen her was when she was honest about our background. Hearing this makes her seem much more lively than she usually is, honestly. So please go on." Amelia said, very matter-of-factly. Does she still look the same? I try not to look her up online. It can be too much, he confessed. Well, her hair has a bit of gray now. She usually doesn't bother with fancy hairstyles unless it's a special event, so she doesn't dye it most of the time. There are a few more lines around her eyes and lips, but it's hard for me to tell since she always looks pretty much the same to me. But yes, I don't think she has changed much over the years, Amelia said. Yeah, no tattoos that we know of, Bradley joked. Not unless they are really well hidden. Bradley, that's your mother you're talking about. Show some respect, Amelia replied sharply. Brett noticed that Bradley was a lot like his father, while Amelia was just like her mother. She stood straight, spoke clearly, and had no need to show off. When you're related to the Queen of England even a little bit, why pretend to be something you're not? Bradley smirked back, and he felt like he recognized that look. Where had he seen it? Was it in the mirror? He smiled to himself. He had many mixed emotions. He had been away from these children for so long that he wasn't really sure they were his. He had missed so much in their lives, and that made him sad. But now they were here, and they wanted to get to know him. That was something important. He looked from Bradley to Amelia, who was now staring back at Brett with bright eyes, her expression hopeful and happy, just like her mother's. She had the same wide smile, making it feel like Brett was the only person in the world to her. When Brett glanced at Bradley, he noticed him trying to act cool and relaxed. But Brett could see how eager he really was. This mattered to him just as much as it did to Amelia, even if he didn't want to show it. Brett let out a small chuckle at this realization, feeling a sense of warmth inside. Looking at Amelia again, his mind traveled back 20 years to an old, worn ship called the Lady Grey. It was the moment Fiona had just woken up. Hello. I assume I was rescued? The woman in the bed asked, holding her blanket for modesty after Brett entered the small cabin. Yes, you were, he replied, walking over to her. I'm Brett, as close to a medic as we have on this ship, Brett Bell, able seaman. American, then? Is this an American ship? She remarked rather than asked, speaking with a very clear British accent. It sounded quite formal to Brett. Actually, it's registered in Honduras. I'm not sure why. We're part of a shipping fleet from Buenos Aires headed for Hong Kong. We should arrive in about 10 days if the weather is good. For some reason, Brett found himself copying her way of speaking. Direct and straightforward, with no extra words. Ah, well, you came just in time, didn't you? Quite a blessing, no doubt. She smiled a little nervously. Did Peppermint Joy make it? She suddenly asked. Your ship? I'm sorry, but it didn't survive. It was taking on water and couldn't stay afloat. We gathered everything we could from the ship, but it sank about 2 hours after you got on board. I'm sorry. Brett said this knowing that sailors often grow very fond of their ships. Well, I suppose it was bound to happen. The storm hit her hard, more than she was built to handle. I measured winds over 100 miles per hour before my little weather station stopped working. Was it a hurricane? A typhoon? Or a cyclone? I think it was a cyclone since we were in the South Pacific, right? You would know, she spoke quickly, running her hand through her chestnut hair in a way that Brett found very charming. Brett realized that this fast talking was one of Fiona's traits, sharing information quickly and turning to other thoughts just as fast. Does it really matter? Brett asked, unsure himself. They were in the South Pacific, but most of the crew called it typhoons. No, I guess not, she continued without pausing. There was a big storm. Whatever it was, it came up behind me. I knew it was coming, but I tried to outrun it, use its power against it. When I saw that wasn't going to happen, I turned around. The storm, did it have a name? I never found out was going northwest, so I aimed southwest to escape it. That didn't work either. I got caught on the edge of it. All I could do was secure everything and ride it out. I tied myself to the steering wheel and held on tightly. It was quite a rough ride, to say the least. I've never gone through anything like it. She paused and glanced at the bandage on her arm. I got this when the mast fell. It took the small radar dish and the radio mast with it, and that's how I got this cut. I had to use some old clothes to wrap it up. The only thing that survived was the medical kit. Brett noticed that she had at least taken care of the wound. It was clean and wrapped when they found her, which likely saved her from infection in the open ocean. It took almost 7 hours before the waves calmed down. I did my best to steer through them, but I knew once things settled I'd be in trouble. The boat did spring some leaks, and salt water got into the batteries. Once that happened, my radio stopped working. I activated the emergency beacon, but I'm not sure it was functioning either. It's hard to tell, to be honest. I also tried the flares that first night after I checked my supplies. That didn't work either. I realized I was almost out of fresh water, so I had to figure something out. You know how it goes, right? She said this so calmly that it was amazing. Brett was impressed by her strength. I did everything I had seen on TV about survival. I made a water catcher from my old sails and created a little fishing pole. All that DIY stuff. Fiona spoke with excitement as she shared what she had done, proud of how she managed to stay calm and survive. I had some food left that wasn't bad, a few cans of soda, and a couple of bottles of water. It was enough to last a bit, but since I had nothing else to do, I tried to learn to fish. Can I tell you a secret? It's really boring. I don't know how those guys can sit by a river all day staring at water. It nearly drove me crazy. Fiona was like a schoolgirl sharing a secret about a crush. Brett tried to join the conversation. I'd like to. And now, I can't even look at a plate of fish and chips without thinking about it, she said, cutting him off. Anyway, I ran out of water a few days ago, and I started to feel pretty rough. Without a way to reach anyone or move the boat, I just tried to stay busy and keep my spirits up. Then you showed up like a hero, and here I am, she said brightly, as if it were a normal thing. Brett marveled at how she pronounced the word armor in her charming way. She was so undeniably British, full of life, and Brett found himself completely taken in by her. Well, it seems you handled your situation pretty well. I stitched up the cut on your arm because it needed it. Sorry about that. You were dehydrated and needed some rest. Good job avoiding the sun, by the way. No sunburn is a plus, he said, standing up from the chair as Fiona finished her story. May I? He asked, extending his hand to her. She shyly took his hand and he checked her pulse. 80 beats per minute, which was just fine. I'd like to. He began, sitting on the edge of the bed. He gently tilted her head to look into her eyes, watching how they focused on him. It seems you don't have a concussion, so it looks like that bump didn't come from hitting your head, he said. No, she replied, keeping her eyes on him. That was me being thrown against the tiller. It hurt, but my dad always says, pain is just weakness leaving the body. I think that's a silly idea, especially since someone who gets hurt must be really strong, right? My dad says a lot of things like that, but I love him anyway. You have to, don't you think? Just follow my finger, he instructed, raising his finger and moving it side to side. She did as he asked, and he nodded. You're fine. You just need to hydrate and relax. Speaking of that. He took her hand and quickly removed the IV. Ouch, she said, rubbing her hand. Did you learn that technique in school? Sorry. I find it's better to do it quickly, he said as he rolled up the tubes. I bet you say that to everyone, she replied with a crooked smile. Look, you need to get dressed. We saved some clothes and they're in the closet over there. They're in the suitcases we managed to pull out, so you'll have to sort through them yourself. Fiona seemed intrigued, then suddenly glanced down at herself. I seem to be a bit underdressed, she said, sounding uncertain. Yes, I apologize. I promise I covered my eyes, Brett responded, trying not to smile. I needed to check on you. I'm sorry I couldn't ask for your permission, but you weren't really with it. She nodded. I see. Please ask next time. You never know how I might respond. Her face lit up, and Brett felt a wave of warmth. She looked like his ideal partner, at least from what he could see. He still wasn't sure about her personality, though. He had learned not to believe in love at first sight. She then asked, Do you have a proper shower on this boat? Not one of those drippy kinds like I had on my yacht? Brett felt relieved to focus on another topic. Yes, there's a shower room for each cabin behind that door. It's not as fancy as a hotel, but it's decent. Fiona's expression brightened even more. I've been looking forward to one of those. The shower on my boat was. Very basic. I could rarely use it while at sea because fresh water was hard to come by. When the storm hit, it was impossible. I learned that soap doesn't work with salt water. I should have thought to bring some special soap, but it just didn't cross my mind. So I suppose I'm a bit smelly right now. She playfully raised her arm and sniffed, holding the sheet against herself. Quite a scent, I'm afraid. I'm surprised you didn't find me just by following the smell. Brett smiled again. Her good mood was catching. Speaking of that, he had to ask, I hope I'm not overstepping, but you seem to have faced some tough times. You must have thought. He paused, suddenly feeling it wasn't the best thing to say. Fiona's expression changed a bit, but then steadied, as if she was gathering her thoughts. Well, I'm British, you see. We have a way of keeping our composure. Honestly, yes, there were moments when I truly thought I might not make it. But you can't just give up, can you? I did my best to find clean water, eat what I could, save my supplies, and just survive, really. I figured that someone would come for me eventually. I just had to hold on until they did. What was I going to do? Jump into the water and give up? Hurt myself and hope for the worst? None of that sounds very good, does it? What would you have done? Well, yes, Brett said, pondering. When you say it that way, I guess you have a point. I never really thought about it like that. No, said Fiona, gazing into the distance. Be glad you don't have to, she added softly after a moment. So, Brett asked after a few seconds of silence, is there someone we should let know? Someone you want to talk to? Oh, Fiona said. Yes, I should have thought about that right away. Sorry, I got so caught up in thinking about a hot shower. Yes, well, my father. He'll be quite worried by now, I'm sure. And Eric, I suppose. Eric? Brett asked, feeling uneasy. Yes, husband. Well, sort of. My father seems to like him more than I do. No brothers, you see. Eric was needed to carry on the family name and lands. My father is very traditional that way. Apparently, Eric is a very useful person to have around, and Eric seems to feel the same about my father. When they start talking, it's like I'm not there at all. It gets boring, to be honest. Eric wasn't my first choice, but my father really wanted him. I'm sorry, Brett said, a bit confused. Best of the choices? Oh, yes. Suitors. When you come out into society, you get many of them, all looking for a chance to marry into the title. It's still quite traditional. I'm sorry, Brett said again, still unsure. I'm really not quite clear on this. Coming out? To be honest, I still don't really know who you are. Her eyes narrowed. You mean you've been talking to me without knowing who I am? Really? What a surprise. She rolled her eyes. I'm Fiona. Fiona Birmingham Hart. That's hyphenated. I'm Lady Fiona, actually. My father is the Duke of Ipswich back home in England. Eric, my husband, is set to inherit a title when my father passes away. This honor has been chosen for him. Meanwhile, my role is to look nice and have children, which is what women of our status are expected to do back home. Even though I married a man I didn't choose, I refuse to just sit around and have lunch with other bored ladies. I want to explore the world and do something meaningful. That's why I'm sailing. Oh, I see. So do I need to call you something special? Is there a title I should use? She laughed. As long as it's not hey you, then Fiona is just fine. Please avoid anything like Fifi. I get enough of that from my mother, and honestly, I can't stand it. It's so silly. She pretended to gag, and Brett couldn't help but be charmed by her lively spirit. Okay then, I'll go talk to the captain and see if he can arrange a ship to shore call. It's a bit tricky, but we can at least send a message to your husband, right? Eric. Is he also from Birmingham? Hart. Yes. But honestly, I wouldn't bother. He probably hasn't even noticed I'm gone. He can be pretty forgetful. He cares more about sorting his prized bull than about me. Just reach out to my father, the Duke of Ipswich. Contact the UK government and they will find him. If I know my dad, he's likely already trying to get a call set up here. Got it. I'll take care of that, Brett replied, feeling a bit let down. Let me. You know what I could really use? Fiona said as Brett stood to leave. A cup of tea. I haven't had a good one in almost 2 weeks. I suppose that got lost too? She asked, sounding disappointed. I'll check, Brett said, feeling more confident now since he was sure some of the supplies had been salvaged. You freshen up and I'll be back with whatever we found. Sounds good, she said with a smile. Go on. Before you see something you shouldn't. Brett stepped out of the cabin, carefully shutting the door behind him, and headed to the place where they had stored the items collected from her boat. 45 minutes later, he returned to her cabin door, holding a cup in one hand and a large, wheeled container in the other. The travel cup was popular worldwide, designed with a wide base for stability. He knocked on the door, listening for a response. "Hello, can I come in?" He vaguely heard her say, "Just a moment." A minute later, the door opened a crack. He caught a glimpse of her pale skin wrapped in a large towel, one item that the ships didn't skimp on another towel on her head. "It's you, right, Brett?" she asked through the small opening. "Yes." "I have something for you," he said, holding up a cup. "Is that—" she asked, covering her mouth. Brett smiled back. "Oh my gosh, marry me!" she shouted, opening the door wide. "Here you go," he replied, giving her the cup. "We found some tea bags in a container and they were dry, so we grabbed them. This," he said, pointing to a big box, "has some of your clothes in it. It's what we could take from your drawers that wouldn't fit in the closet in your cabin. There's more back at the other cabin along with everything else we saved. You can look through them later. I thought you might need some new clothes now." "Oh yes, please. Forget everything else. Let's just relax for a week. Best idea right now." Fiona was clearly excited. After Brett brought the box in and set it on her bunk, she quickly opened it and began to search through it. "You found my things. Well, that's good. Let's see." She pulled out a shirt, some clothes, and sweatpants, examining them closely. "Well, they could use a wash, but they're not too bad. They'll work for now." "Do you have a washing machine on board?" she asked, not really expecting an answer. "Actually, we do. It's one deck down. You're supposed to buy your own detergent, but you can use mine," he said. "You do?" she exclaimed. "Wow, I really lucked out. This is great. You'll drink my tea, change into some clothes, and then we can do the laundry. Wonderful news." Then she looked pointedly at Brett. He stared back, captivated. Her figure was clear even with the bandage on her arm and the bruise on her forehead. She looked very beautiful, especially in this vulnerable moment. After a short time, she politely coughed, and he realized that she wanted to get dressed and he was in the way. "Oh, right. Yes. Sorry," he stammered. He seemed to be doing that a lot around her. "I'll go now. I'm in the next cabin. Just knock on the door when you're done. He'll take you to the laundry. The captain is setting up a call for you probably tomorrow, but at least he knows you've been found." "Oh, good. That's great to know. Thank you. He'll find you in a bit, okay?" she said, gently urging him to leave. Feeling embarrassed that he hadn't picked up on her hint, Brett turned and left the cabin. He quickly called the bridge to let the captain know that their guest was awake and would be asking for a call to her family when convenient, to which he received a brief reply. He explained that Fiona would be going through what they had collected, doing some laundry, and getting to know her new home for the next few days. He asked the captain to inform the crew about their new guest, who was minor British royalty, so they would be on their best behavior. The captain grunted in response, but Brett believed he would want to avoid any negative reports reaching the ship's owners, so he would likely let everyone know to treat her with respect. The captain then said he had lighter duties, with less than half his usual shifts, and now Fiona was his responsibility. He was there to keep her happy and healthy until they reached their destination. 20 minutes later, he heard a knock on the door and found a refreshed Fiona smiling brightly at him. "Okay, what's next? How about a quick tour? I think we should check out what you all saved, then stop by the laundry and finally get something to eat. I'm starving." She laughed a little shyly. Brett quickly realized that Fiona liked to make plans and stick to them closely. He nodded. "Sure, that sounds good. Cookie should have some food ready. He usually has pastries and—" He looked at his watch. "It's almost noon. Lunch should be ready soon." He nodded again, then noticed Fiona tilting her head at him with a playful smile. "What's up?" "You're kind of adorable when faced with a demanding woman," she said, teasing him. "Has anyone ever told you that, Sir Knight?" Brett felt a bit awkward after her comment and wasn't sure how to reply. They both paused, staring at each other until he cleared his throat and said, "Right, shall we?" "Ah." Her smile grew wider as she linked her arm with his. "Lead on, good sir." They went to the storage room where the salvaged items were kept. Fiona spent the next half hour sorting through it, sometimes feeling sad about what was lost, and other times cheering when she found something she thought was gone. After 30 minutes, she had a pile of clothes in her arms and a bag for her delicate items, ready to head to the laundry room. The laundry was one floor down, and Fiona had quite a challenge navigating the narrow stairs between the floors. Space on a ship was limited, and the stairs were a tight fit. A container ship was different from other large ships because all the storage and living areas were in one place at the back. This area was in a big upright section on the upper part of the ship, called the sail, even though there wasn't an actual sail. After some time, they arrived, having gone back several times to pick up forgotten items. Somehow, by the time they got there, Brett was carrying more than Fiona. Fiona excitedly admired the laundry facilities, claiming she had never seen better. That was clearly an exaggeration since they were simple at best. She felt thrilled to have clean clothes after so long without them. Once they started a wash cycle using all 3 machines, Fiona declared it was time for a tour and then lunch. Brett gave her a quick tour, showing her around the sail. They visited the dining area, the library, and the bridge, where the crew gave her some admiring looks. He introduced her to the captain, and they had a brief conversation about arranging a call to shore, which the captain agreed to after explaining their route. Brett even took her down to the engine room, where she met Jock, the chief engineer, who didn't seem to warm up to her at all. Brett noticed how charming Fiona was with everyone. She greeted each person with a smile, thanked them sincerely for their help, and made sure to look them in the eye. The only person who didn't seem affected was Jock, but Brett said that Jock was generally pretty grumpy and didn't like anyone. Still, Brett admired Fiona's ability to connect with others, especially when they met Pierre in the dining area. Pierre was the cook, and he fit the role of a French short-order cook perfectly. He had scruffy hair, a cigarette often in his mouth, and a bit of a sassy attitude when it came to his food. He also believed that women couldn't resist him. When he saw Fiona, he quickly tried to fix his hair and put on an exaggerated smile. "Well, my dear, welcome to our humble." "Enough, Pierre," Brett interrupted before he could finish his routine. "What's for lunch?" "For you, I have something not so pleasant. And for the lady, the finest meatloaf, made with love and seasoned just like they do in the best French restaurants. I heard there was someone on board who would appreciate it, rather than these tasteless sailors, so for you, beautiful." "Does that ever work?" Fiona asked curiously, cutting through Pierre Long's speech. "I mean, that kind of talk seems pretty simple." The accent was nice and could make a lot of things easier, but honestly, we were on a cargo ship in the Pacific Ocean. I had just been saved from a sinking boat from a dangerous situation, and right now, I felt pretty awful. "What exactly do you want from me?" Pierre looked puzzled. Women usually didn't challenge him directly like this, and he didn't know how to respond. Brett was enjoying watching Pierre squirm. "Three just wanted you to see some style among all these ordinary folks," he stammered, unsure. Fiona suddenly smiled. "Oh, don't take me seriously, Pierre. I'm just teasing. Thank you for the welcome and for cooking for me. I really appreciate it. I'm sure we will be great friends," she said, stressing the word friends, so he would know she wasn't interested in anything more. "Still, let's see what we've got here." Fiona took a little of everything on her plate, smiling at Pierre, who looked quite unsettled. Then, winking at Brett, she sat down to eat. Brett filled his plate too and joined her. With barely a, "I'm so hungry," Fiona dove into her food. After a few bites, she paused. "Oh no," she said softly. After taking a couple more bites, she exclaimed, "Oh, this isn't good at all. No, no, no." She got up and went over to where Pierre was now serving 2 other crewmen who were watching her closely. "Pierre, we need to talk. This won't do. We can definitely do better than this. Were you in a rush?" Fiona's voice was firm. She was clearly putting on a show. Pierre just stared at her, finally saying, "Well, it's not exactly a fancy restaurant back here." "I understand, but there's more we can do. Do you have any barbecue sauce? Maybe some Worcestershire sauce? What about ground pepper?" Pierre stared at her for a moment, then suddenly perked up, going back into the kitchen. We heard him rummaging around, and he came back holding a bottle of HP sauce and a pepper shaker. "Great. Now here's what we're going to do," Fiona began. "Wait a minute." Pierre interrupted, finding his confidence. "This is my kitchen. What do you think you're doing?" No matter how charming she was, Pierre wasn't about to take cooking tips from anyone else. Fiona sighed and got straight to the point. What is it going to take, Pierre? A special favor? Brett nearly laughed out loud at that. It was quite something to hear the words in such a rich British accent. Pierre's eyes widened, and he unintentionally dropped his cigarette into the mashed potatoes, unnoticed by anyone else. "All right then," Fiona said, and for just a moment, she lifted her shirt slightly, giving Pierre a brief view. No one noticed except him, and it all happened so quickly that everyone else was just shocked. "Now you've seen something. My turn. Let's add some flavor to this meatloaf, and I can share some tips on the mashed potatoes later. Do you happen to have any onion soup mix?" She reached over and grabbed the HP sauce from a surprised Pierre, who was still in shock and unable to speak, and poured it over the meatloaf on the tray, then added a good amount of pepper on top. "That should do it," she said, brushing her hands together. "You guys give that a try and tell me what you think," she said to the other two surprised crew members, pointing at the meatloaf. Then she turned and sat down next to Brett, smiling widely. Brett suddenly hesitated in his story, realizing he was telling this to her kids. He glanced at Amelia, who was sitting there, mouth open, just like Pierre had been. He looked at Bradley, who was trying hard not to laugh. When he looked back at Amelia, he saw she was trembling with laughter. Then Amelia laughed loudly, and Bradley quickly joined her. They both fell over with laughter, like people who just can't stop. Brett sat there, watching them, confused about what was happening. Eventually, Amelia, wiping her eyes, said, "Sorry, Dad. Yeah, I know that was a bit much for Mom, right? But when you think about it, that sounds just like something she'd do, right, brother?" "Oh, for sure," Bradley replied, also wiping his face. "That's Mom, completely. Remember the calendar?" Brett felt a bit left out, with a puzzled look on his face. "So, did you ever hear about that movie with the women's group that made a special calendar? It had big names like Helen Mirren in it." "No. It was a big deal in the UK, based on a true story about a group of older women who posed for a calendar to raise money for a local hospital. When Mom saw that, she jumped right in. She got all the local women's groups to pose at our place within a week. Dad just shook his head and went off to the stables to stay away from it. Mom took charge and even posed for it herself. She made 4 calendars a year for 7 years and raised almost £500,000 for local charities. That's who Mom is. So your story fits her perfectly. We're not surprised at all." Brett sat there thinking about the story. He could easily believe it. Now he was thinking about how to ask if the kids still had any of those calendars. "Sorry," said Bradley. "We didn't mean to interrupt. Please, continue." Brett cleared his throat and went on. Later that day, feeling much better, Brett suggested a walk around the ship. "You mean we can go all the way around? Those big boxes won't block the way?" asked Fiona. "Well, they do get in the way a bit, but no, there's a walkway all the way around," Brett explained. "It gets a little narrow in the front, but it's open. Some crew members use scooters to get around, actually." "How long is it?" Fiona asked, curious. "Almost exactly 1/5 of a mile all the way around," replied Brett. "So 5 times around is a mile?" Fiona seemed more excited with each moment. "I could run around?" "Yes, I do that regularly. It's much nicer than the treadmill in the gym." "Wait, stop. You have a gym on this boat?" Fiona exclaimed, her excitement showing as she stopped and put her foot down. "Well, it's not much. Just a multi-gym machine, some free weights, and a treadmill. Not much. I had to use this awkward piece of equipment on the boat. It was too cramped and not very good, but it was all I could bring on the ship. I had it set up at the front. It was not great. A real gym? Oh yes, I can run. Wait, can we go back to the storage room first?" "Take me there right now," Fiona said firmly, grabbing Brett's shirt. Brett nodded and led her back to the storage area. Fiona dug into the boxes and suddenly shouted in joy. "Aha! There we go!" she yelled proudly, holding up 2 tennis shoes. "All set! Now we can run together!" Brett felt unsure. "You've just been through a tough experience, Fiona. Your body needs to recover. Maybe the gym isn't the best idea." "Yes, thank you, doctor," she said, ignoring him and continuing to search through her boxes. "I understand. I'll take it easy," she added, though her tone suggested she wouldn't. A few minutes later, she came back with her arms full of what looked like workout clothes. Was that a sports top? "Now show me this gym," she insisted. They went to the gym and she gasped in amazement for a while, then put on her shoes. She tried the treadmill for a few minutes, got tired quickly, then switched to some free weights. Brett just sat and watched, knowing any warnings he gave would be ignored. That was just who Fiona was. She would figure it out soon enough. 5 minutes into her small workout, Fiona suddenly slowed down and carefully set the weights down. "Wow, that hurts. I guess the exercise on the boat wasn't enough," she said, catching her breath. "Or it could be the poor nutrition and lack of water over the past few days, too, you never know," replied Brett jokingly. "But what would I know? Not being a doctor and all." Fiona shot him a playful glare, then spoke softer. "Maybe I should relax a little. Sorry, Brett. I'm just so excited to be back among everything I've missed these past months. Being alone on that small boat. Well," there was a lot left unsaid in her words, and Brett sensed she needed someone to talk to. Fiona was trying to hide her fear about her experiences, and that was clear. He wasn't a therapist, but he could at least be a friend, someone she could talk to and help her face her worries. "Let's get you back to your room. We can grab a snack on the way and then you should rest. You need both food and sleep." Fiona looked at him, astonished. "Did you just say sustenance? That's impressive," she exclaimed after a moment of surprise. Brett nodded, feeling a bit shy. "You Americans always know how to surprise me," she said, heading toward the door. They picked up a small sandwich, and Fiona was yawning by the time they reached her room. "Actually, now that you mention it, I am feeling quite tired," she said with another yawn. Brett nodded. It was clear that her body needed rest after everything. When they reached her door, she paused, turned around, and, standing on her toes, gave Brett a quick kiss on the cheek. "You're so sweet to look after me. Don't you have something else to do? A shift or something?" Brett replied, "I have a shift later tonight when you'll be asleep. Just some routine bridge duty. Nothing thrilling." "Oh, so you're not just here for me?" "Oh, I am. I'll be here for you as much as I can when I'm not working." As soon as he said that, he wished he hadn't, realizing how it might sound. "Well, you're making a girl think, sailor," she joked with a cheeky wink. "Can you wake me later?" "Of course. Is there anything else you need?" "I wish I had my tapes and player," she thought aloud. "They're probably lost at the bottom of the sea now," she said, sounding sad. "But there's no use crying about it. I'll make do. See you soon." She yawned again, and Brett suddenly realized that even her yawning had a charm to it, which made her seem quite captivating. Brett paused for a moment, looking at those around him with puzzled expressions. "Tapes," he explained. "Cassette tapes. A small Walkman player. You know, we used to record music onto those. This was back when CDs were just becoming popular, and your mother hadn't quite caught up yet." Amelia nodded, understanding now. "Those are the things you used to roll the tape around with a pencil, right? When the tape came out of the cassette?" "Yeah, that's right. Back then we had boom boxes, a big box with a tape player, a radio, and large speakers on both sides. Almost everyone had one, and they used those big batteries." "Thank goodness we have iPods now, right?" Amelia said with a smile at her brother. "What a silly time that was." "Just don't let Mom hear you say that," Brett warned. "I might not know her well, but I know she loved her music and her mixtapes." "Yeah, we know," Bradley sighed. "She's still making mixtapes on CDs and now on her iTunes account. She's definitely stuck in the 1980s. I mean, who even is Kag-a-Goo-Goo anyway?" he asked, shaking his head. Brett chuckled a little and continued with his story. While Fiona slept, Brett looked through the storage area to see what had been saved. He found a few things he thought would make Fiona happy and gathered them up. He then went to the laundry room to collect her clothes, now cleaned and dried. Feeling a bit embarrassed, he grabbed a basket and gathered everything, hoping he wouldn't run into any of the crew. Explaining why he had a basket of women's clothes was not something he wanted to do. Once he put those away, he sat in the medical bay to check supplies. After a while, he noticed that 3 hours had gone by, so he stood, stretched, and went to the kitchen to grab some hot food. He found Pierre doing his usual act of pretending to be better than everyone else. Brett took a couple of plates of chicken pot pie and some drinks, and walked back to Fiona's room. He knocked on the door, balancing the plates in one hand, and waited for a moment before a yawning, messy-haired Fiona opened it. "Oh, hot food! What do we have?" she exclaimed, looking at the plates. "Chicken pot pie. It's not the best, but it's fresh and warm and it should help, he said, handing her a plate. What, no diet soda? She asked, holding up the drink. I think I could get you one. Brett began, standing up. No, I'm just teasing you. Stay seated. I just like to mess around a bit, Fiona said quickly. Trust me, I could probably use the energy, she added, opening the can and taking a long sip. Then she glanced at Brett and started singing, quite off tune. I'd like to teach the world to sing, in perfect harmony. She burst into laughter, sounding just like a little girl. Oh, come on, that was funny, she teased Brett, who was trying hard not to smile. Brett let a small smile appear on his face. Then, serious and pretending to be calm, he picked up a tiny carrot from his plate and tossed it at Fiona. She sat there surprised, with the carrot on her nose. Did you just... she asked, shocked. I'm not sure what you mean, he replied, now looking at his plate and using his fork to take a bite of pie. Yum! You should eat yours while it's warm. Fiona kept staring at him. Then, trying to be graceful, she removed the carrot from her nose and ate it. Oh, it's on. I'd throw my plate at you, but I'm hungry and need the what's that word? Oh yes, sustenance. But don't think this is over. It'll get even. Believe me, I spent 4 years at Benetton Girls' School, and we know how to get back at people. Then she scooped up some of her pie. They ate quietly for the next 10 minutes until both plates were empty. Brett noticed Fiona looking at her plate, deep in thought. He reached over and took the plate, saying, Pierre would be so mad if this broke, so he'll just take it. Brett was enjoying putting Fiona off balance. He could see she wanted to outdo him, and honestly, he didn't mind. A little fun was good for her. Let me take these back, and then I have something for you, he said, standing to take the plates away. A present? For me? Oh, sir, you know how to impress a girl. More carrots, I assume? Her sarcasm was thick. He chuckled and walked out with the plates. When he returned, he stopped by his cabin to grab a basket before going back to her room. Knock, knock, he said, opening the door, realizing it might not be the best idea. She was lying on the bed, her head resting in one hand, looking beautiful even with her bruises. Here, he said, handing her the basket while keeping his other hand behind his back. Oh, laundry. Mr. Bell, you certainly know how to surprise a girl with gifts like that. Good thing I'm already lying down or I might have fainted. Yeah, replied Brett, smiling at her. That's not the gift. This is... Ta-da! He revealed her Walkman, headphones, and a small box full of cassette tapes. Oh my God, my Walkman! Cried Fiona, suddenly thrilled. She jumped up, tossing the basket aside. Oh, I could hug you. In fact... She threw her arms around him, pulling him into a warm embrace. What began as a quick hug lingered longer than they expected, and for a few extra seconds they simply stayed close, almost frozen in the moment. She pulled back slightly, looking at him with a glimmer of surprise, and then, as if on impulse, hugged him again, this time even tighter, with a warmth usually reserved for close friends or family. For Brett, it was a surprising moment, a shared gesture he hadn't anticipated but found comforting. He knew she was married, but in that instant, all that mattered was their shared relief. When she stepped back, Fiona's cheeks were flushed, and she looked a bit flustered. Sorry, I'm just really grateful to have my tapes back, she muttered, glancing away. Of course, Brett replied, nodding. We found them in a plastic container. Looked like it was waterproof, so we grabbed it. When you mentioned your tapes, I thought we might found something important, so I went and checked just to be sure. He stopped speaking, not sure what else to say, but before he could think further, Fiona wrapped him in another hug, pulling him close, expressing her gratitude with a warmth that surprised them both. Brett found himself hugging her back, moved by her appreciation and the unexpected connection in that quiet moment. They pulled apart after a few moments, both catching their breath, each surprised at how the moment had unfolded. Brett began, unsure how to break the silence. No, must be all the excitement, Fiona replied hurriedly with a soft laugh. Brett nodded, giving her a reassuring smile. Honestly, it's the nicest moment I've had in a long time. Thanks, he said, trying to keep the mood light. Fiona smiled, a hint of amusement in her eyes. Brett turned to set her Walkman and tapes down on the table nearby, hoping to ease the moment. "Oh, really?" she asked with a slight grin, as if amused by his honesty. Brett realized she was still enjoying their lighthearted exchange and didn't seem embarrassed. In that shared glance, they both recognized a moment of friendship and mutual respect, grateful for the kindness exchanged without any need for words. It was a rare, quiet understanding, one that made both of them smile as they returned to the rest of their day, leaving the moment behind with a sense of fondness. "If that's the best kiss you've had all year, I wonder what this would do for you." Brett felt his heart race. The truth was, she was someone else's wife. He took a deep breath and stepped back, gently moving her hand away from him. "Lady Fiona," he said quietly, trying to make it clear that this was not a good idea for him. "I really think—" She laughed lightly. "Oh, come on, it wasn't going to go any further," she said teasingly. Her tone was playful, not mean. "I know it's wrong, and I just wanted to see your reaction." Then she looked down, smiled, and added in a soft voice, "And it seems like I did." Brett felt the urgency to leave that room immediately. He needed to get to his cabin quickly to avoid any awkwardness, and he couldn't let that happen. "Ma'am?" He nodded, backing away fast and nearly tripping over the door frame. He glanced back to see her amused expression as he hurried out. Once outside, he leaned against the wall, catching his breath and wondering what he had done to deserve this situation. He knew he would have a lot to think about that evening. Just as he settled in, his phone buzzed, letting him know that the captain needed Lady Fiona in the bridge for a scheduled call. With a sigh, he headed back to her cabin and knocked on the door. "Yes," she called as she opened the door, looking a bit tousled and warm. "The call is ready for you. You can take it here," he indicated her phone, "or up in the bridge. It's your choice." She paused for a moment, then made a quick decision. "Down here is fine. Can you ask the captain to connect it here?" "Thank you, Brett." He nodded and went back to his cabin, calling the captain before sitting down, curious about how the call would go. The next morning, Brett was up early, even after his long shift. He had learned to grab quick naps whenever he could during his naval career. Like all sailors, he adapted to living on short rests. Standing outside Fiona's cabin, he wondered what the day had in store for him and hoped to make it through without any embarrassing moments. Just as he raised his hand to knock, the door swung open, and Fiona nearly knocked him over as she came out. She wore a snug white outfit, a shirt with open sides, a sports bra underneath, fitted pants and ankle warmers on her feet, topped off with white sneakers. Standing in front of him, she shifted her weight from one foot to the other, clearly preparing for some exercise. "Good morning, Brett. Come on, we have to make the most of the daylight. I can't tell you how excited I am for our run. I had a wonderful sleep and feel so much better. Now go get your workout clothes on, please. Hurry up." She spoke quickly, a smile on her face filled with eager anticipation. Brett just looked at her. Her hair was pulled back with a clip, making her features look sharp, but showcasing her high cheekbones and bright eyes. She wore no makeup, but her clear, pale skin didn't need any, except for a small bruise. He felt a strong urge to reach out and kiss her, completely captivated. "Come on, Brett. The time is slipping away. Let's go," she urged. He was sure she knew how she affected him and enjoyed teasing him, especially when she added, "I'll just stretch here while you change," then bent down to reach her toes, giving him a view that made it hard to focus. He shook his head to clear his thoughts. He was a seaman. He couldn't lose his composure over a woman. Get it together. He turned away, muttering to himself, and then headed to his cabin to change into shorts, a shirt, and running shoes without considering whether he should decline her invitation. 5 minutes later, he opened his door to see her leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, a playful smirk on her face. "Ready now, Slowpoke?" she teased. "Last one around buys breakfast," she shouted, then took off running down the narrow corridor. Brett stepped out of his cabin, closed the door, and waited until Fiona returned moments later, her face red from running because she had gone the wrong way and ended up at a stairwell leading down into the ship. "Well, that was a mistake," she said, looking determined but slightly embarrassed. "You lead the way then," she said, motioning for him to go the other direction, while he tried to keep a serious expression. Brett guided her out of the ship's lower areas and down to the outside. The ship was stacked high with shipping containers, 8 levels tall, towering above the deck. The deck was fully loaded as well, with just enough space around the edges for 2 people to walk side by side. When they stepped outside, it was quite chilly, and Brett stopped Fiona from running off. He explained that they needed to run in a single line. Even though the path was wide enough for them to run side by side, there were some pieces of equipment sticking out that could make it tricky. "This boat is older," he said as he began to stretch his legs, focusing on working each muscle. "Newer boats don't have this ledge. They have a path that goes underneath the containers. The containers are stacked right to the edge on a sturdy base, and there's a deck around the bottom of them like the old walking decks you see on some classic ships." "Really?" Fiona asked. "That sounds interesting. Don't those containers weigh a lot?" "Yes, but the base is part of the boat," Brett replied. "It can hold the weight without falling because it is built to support them." Fiona nodded. "Okay, I'm warmed up. Are you ready?" Brett asked. "As ready as he'll ever be. 5 times for a mile, right? Let's go for 3 miles. Think you can keep up, big guy?" she joked. Brett held up his arm to stop her, saying seriously, "Fiona, please understand you haven't run in a while. You are recovering from a big life change and you might tire out. Let's take it easy and see how it goes, okay?" Fiona smiled at him, a bit playfully. "Yeah, just try to keep up with me." She ducked under his arm and took off. The trail was easy to follow, and she kept a steady pace. Brett was fine with being behind her. It let her lead the way, and it felt nice to watch her run. Soon both of them were warm, and as the sun rose, the day got warmer and they started to sweat. Fiona managed to complete 4 laps before she needed to slow down and walk, clearly out of breath. Brett could hear her talking softly to herself, encouraging and pushing herself. He focused on his own breathing, keeping his pace steady, knowing that her desire to run might be more than what she could handle at the moment. After the 8th lap, Fiona stopped, resting against the wall and breathing heavily. "Sorry," she gasped, trying to catch her breath. "I'm really out of shape." "It's okay," Brett said. "I usually don't run more than a couple of miles a day," he added, which wasn't true since he usually did 3 to 4 miles whenever he could. He wanted to give her a break so she didn't overdo it this early in her recovery. He didn't need a setback just because she was so competitive, especially when it was clear she was. Fiona wasn't fooled for a moment. She turned to him with an unhappy look. "Don't pretend with me. I know when someone is talking down to me," she said. He simply shrugged and replied, "Okay, how about one more round then?" "Sure, that sounds fine," she said haughtily, flicking her hair. "Come on, Slowpoke." She completed 2 more laps before pausing to catch her breath. "I think that's enough for now," she managed to say. Brett smiled at her. "Well, you've already done much more than most of the crew here, so don't feel bad," he said, his eyes sparkling. "You've been through a lot, and you still show most of this group how it's done." She smiled back at him and said, "Aren't you just sweet?" Looking right into his eyes, as if seeing deeper. Shaking off the moment, he suggested they walk back to their cabins, and as they walked, he noticed she was limping. He looked at her curiously, and she replied, wincing, "Shin splints. I always get them when I run. I wish I could fix them." "Oh, that's not too hard to deal with," he said casually as they walked along the edge of the ship. Fiona gave him a scrutinizing look. "Oh, you just happen to know the answer, do you? I did 8 years of ballet and they couldn't help. But you have the secret, right? Is that what they teach on this old ship?" she asked. "Well, not exactly, but I learned it from a Nigerian crew member we had," he responded carefully, unsure if she was serious. "Basically, lean back," he added. "When you run, lean back a bit. It might feel silly, but it will help with the shin splints." Fiona stopped and stared at him as if he were joking. "Really?" "Yeah. Think about it. Shin splints happen because of too much pressure on the front of the shin. That pressure comes from your body weight with each step. You can't avoid it entirely, but leaning back helps. It spreads the weight more evenly over your legs. The back leg supports more of it. Plus, it helps the leg that pushes off to be more upright, so the weight goes straight down instead of over the shin." Fiona considered his words and continued walking. "All right, let's say I give it a try. If it doesn't work and you're just joking, I'll make sure you regret it," she said. But if it does work, he'll owe you one." He glanced at her and noticed a playful smile, a mix of teasing and fun. Then she winced, taking a cautious step, and Brett immediately moved closer, concerned. "Here, let me help," he said, gently putting her arm around his shoulder. "Ah, I see just an excuse to get close, sailor," she teased with a smirk. Brett didn't know how to respond without it sounding awkward, so he just smiled and helped her along quietly. When they reached the cabin, Brett noticed her discomfort and hesitantly offered, "How about a leg massage? It might help with the strain." He knew it could be seen as a bit too familiar, but he reasoned it was meant to ease her discomfort. She looked at him, clearly amused. "Oh, really? And does that come with a happy ending?" she asked with a mischievous twinkle. "You'll get a warning if you keep joking around," Brett replied, trying to keep things light. She laughed and flopped onto the bed, extending her foot toward him with a dramatic tone. "Go ahead, but remember, these feet are practically royal. Handle with care." Brett chuckled, knelt down, and took her foot in his hand, carefully unlacing her shoe. He exaggerated a reaction to the faint scent from her feet, making her laugh. "Impossible! These royal feet are flawless," she said, playing along. "How dare you insult them?" Grinning, Brett began gently massaging her calves. He could feel the tension in her muscles and worked on easing it, focusing on one area at a time. Fiona quickly quieted, leaning back against the pillows, sighing softly as he continued the massage. Her eyes closed, and she was silent except for the occasional contented sigh. Brett remembered his mother teaching him how to give a proper foot massage long ago, and how she'd said it was a useful skill he'd appreciate someday. He hadn't thought much of it back then, but now he was glad to have learned it. He spent a few minutes on each leg, working carefully over her feet, ankles, and calves. Fiona seemed completely relaxed, leaning back with her eyes closed, letting him work out the knots and tension in her muscles. "Would you like me to continue higher?" he asked softly, sensing her deep relaxation. "Oh, yes, please," she murmured, lost in the comfort of the moment. Brett hesitated, then continued carefully, focused on providing relief, feeling grateful to offer her a bit of ease. He had made a suggestion and now needed to follow through, but he felt a conflict between his feelings and what was right. This woman was married, but she seemed to respond to him, and he found himself very interested in her. What was it the British said? In for a penny, in for a pound? Well, he felt he was deep into it. Cautiously, he moved his hands up her legs, gently massaging the area just below her knees. Fiona let out soft sounds of enjoyment. He then slowly worked his way higher. She was wearing snug pants that made it easy for him to feel how her muscles moved beneath. Fiona propped herself up on her elbows, looking at him with a playful gaze. "You are really good at this," she said softly. He stopped for a moment and shrugged. "I had a mother who was on her feet all day. She always wanted a massage when she got home, so I learned how. But I don't get to do this often." "What? All the sailors here not asking for your special touch?" she joked, a light laugh escaping her lips. "Not really," he replied. "Thankfully." "Well, what are you waiting for? Keep going," she said after a brief moment of shared looks. "Do you want to turn over? I can massage your shoulders and back too." "Oh, you sweet man. I wish I could keep you around." "My friends would pay a lot for you," she said, turning onto her back. Brett moved up and started to massage her shoulders over her loosed shirt. "Wait," she said, sitting up and taking off her shirt, leaving a sports bra on underneath. "This makes it easier." At this point, Brett wished he had some oils or warmers for a better experience, but as a merchant sailor, he made the best of what he had. He focused on her shoulders, working the outside and then the inside, easing the tight spots in her shoulder blades. Many muscles came together there, often leading to tension that was easier to relieve since it was close to the surface. Then he moved to her lower back. Fiona had many tense spots there as well, which was to be expected. He knew to be gentle the spine was nearby, and there were sensitive areas that needed caution. And then, he felt nervous when he reached the lower back. "Oh my goodness," he thought. "I can't believe I'm touching this woman. She's related to the Queen of England." He risked a quick glance at her head. Many people would be asleep by now from this kind of treatment. Was she? No. She was still awake. He noticed her gaze fixed on him, watching intently without looking away. He cleared his throat nervously, unsure of what she expected. "A little lower," she said softly, her tone gentle but clear. He started, uncertain. "Lower," she repeated with a calm confidence. "Aren't you supposed to help me relax?" "Well, yes, but—" He hesitated. "Then please," she added with a soft smile. He took a deep breath and moved his hands a bit lower, focused on easing her tension. "Just a little more," she encouraged, and he carefully adjusted, making sure to keep his mind on simply helping her unwind. Finally, when he reached the right spot, she murmured, "There, that's perfect," her voice sounding relieved. He gently continued, mindful of her comfort. Her breathing slowed and she seemed more at ease, adjusting her shoulders into a comfortable position. Brett concentrated on the task, unsure when to stop but knowing he'd feel it when it was time. After a couple of minutes, he gradually moved his hands back up to her shoulders, finishing with a gentle press before stepping back respectfully. "All done, Mom," he said softly. Fiona exhaled a deep, relaxed sigh, then slowly sat up, regarding him thoughtfully. "Thank you," she said quietly, almost to herself, her gaze steady. For Brett, she seemed radiant, her calm presence filling the room. Her hair had slipped from its neat hold, framing her face with a natural, gentle look. He tried his best to remain composed, hoping his careful, respectful tone communicated his sincerity. "You really are quite kind, you know that?" she said after a moment. "Come closer." Brett felt a mix of emotions but moved closer, responding to her warm smile. They shared a quiet, understanding look, appreciating the light-hearted comfort of the moment. He hesitated for a moment, and losing patience, Fiona pulled him toward her, catching him off guard with a quick, surprising kiss. Brett felt a rush of excitement at the unexpected closeness. Fiona was energetic, strong-willed, and charismatic, a fascinating person to be around. He returned her kiss with equal warmth, surprised by how comfortable the moment felt between them. For that brief time, the worries of the world seemed to fade, leaving just the two of them sharing an honest, spontaneous connection. As the kiss ended, she took a step back, looking at him with a determined yet playful expression, breathing lightly as she steadied herself. Brett knew that what was unfolding was unexpected, but he couldn't deny the shared energy between them. They both knew they had been through a challenging time, and this small moment felt like a shared celebration, a relief from the stress and isolation of recent events. Fiona gave a light-hearted laugh, her eyes sparkling. "Well," she said with a grin, "guess that was overdue." They both chuckled, each feeling a bit lighter than before, and Brett took a deep breath, glad for the warmth of that moment. Brett knew the intensity of the moment was building, and he sensed the need to ease up. He pulled back, giving Fiona a gentle, reassuring smile as she caught her breath. "Thanks," she said with a playful sparkle in her eye, her voice soft. Before he could respond, she shifted and stretched, looking at him with a lively determination. "All right," she said, a grin spreading across her face. "I need to let off some steam. It's been months since I felt this free." Brett sensed the release of tension in her voice. She had clearly been through a lot, and this was a moment of relief, an outpouring of emotions from recent stresses. It was apparent she needed a light-hearted distraction, a bit of fun to clear her mind. They shared a laugh, and he leaned in, letting the humor of the moment carry them both forward, no longer caught up in recent hardships. The two of them, in that cabin, enjoyed the rare ease and freedom, both grateful for the companionship after months of worry. As they finally settled, catching their breath in shared silence, they exchanged an unspoken understanding. It had been a long journey, filled with ups and downs, but here they were, able to enjoy a shared peace at last. And in that quiet space, they both felt the relief that came from simply being understood and valued, each savoring the lightness of the moment before returning to the realities ahead. Fiona let out a long, contented sigh, finally relaxing and catching her breath. She looked up at Brett with a soft smile, clearly relieved. "That was exactly what I needed," she said, a touch of humor in her voice. her expression one of quiet appreciation. Brett gave her a moment to gather herself, feeling grateful for the shared comfort between them. After a long silence, they exchanged a warm, understanding look. He continued to sit beside her, feeling a sense of closeness, grateful for her friendship and the release of the day's tension. The quiet settled around them, but then an awareness crept in, a reminder that both would return to their usual lives, with boundaries and responsibilities. They both knew things couldn't go further without complicating their friendship and their time on the ship. Brett looked away briefly, giving her space, and as he glanced back, he saw she had the same thoughtful expression. They each realized that this light-hearted escape, though comforting, was a rare passing moment in their journey. The two shared an unspoken agreement, a return to being supportive friends who had helped each other through a difficult time. Brett knew he'd keep her company for the rest of their journey without crossing boundaries, appreciating the strength of their connection without complicating it. With a final, understanding smile, Brett resolved to focus on the road ahead and to support her as a friend, grateful for the kindness they had exchanged. She clearly had her own problems to deal with, and he was not helping at all. When she thought about it, she felt angry at him for taking advantage. He really needed to give her some space. He stumbled, unsure of what to say. "Oh, it's fine. More than fine," she said softly. "Look, I think I should go." "Yes, let's just talk later," he blurted out. He was tripping over his words. He needed to leave. He had done something he wasn't proud of, and she would figure it out. He wondered what the captain would say when she told him. He quickly got dressed and left the cabin, squinting as the bright light hit his eyes. Luckily, his cabin was only a few doors down, so he hoped he wouldn't see any crew members heading to lunch. Lunch? Was it already that time? He opened his door, rushed in, and shut it hard behind him, leaning against it and gasping for breath. Brett glanced at his captivated audience. He had definitely toned down the details of what happened. They did not need to hear about their mother that way. He had stumbled through his words, trying to find a way to tell them that he had been with their mother, and even worse, she had welcomed it. Some things kids should not know about their parents. Amelia leaned back and looked at Bradley, grinning widely. "Way to go, Mom. Woo." Bradley frowned at her. "Really, Millie? Oh, come on. Did you ever think Mom had that side to her?" She laughed at her own joke. "Let's be real. Mom is not the most passionate person. She's sensible. Sometimes she steps outside her comfort zone, but she's usually calm and collected. Duty first, right? How many times have we heard that, Brad? This is different." "Look." Brett was unsure about continuing. "So you backed out. Mom was worn out and you ran away to... What, think about nothing? What happened next?" Amelia leaned in, resting her chin on her hands, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. She looked at Bradley, who shrugged and raised his beer bottle, encouraging Brett to keep talking. After a quick shower in the simple bathroom, Brett dressed in a clean uniform and sat down, staring at a glass of water on his table. This was not who he was. He was a merchant sailor, and while many in his line of work were not very ethical, he tried to keep his values. He didn't engage with women for money, he didn't gamble, and most importantly, he didn't get involved with married women, especially not those married to important men. But he had. He had let his feelings lead him, and now he found himself in a tricky situation. He didn't have any precautions in place. For all he knew, she might be in a fertile phase. This was not good. He wondered what to do next. Should he talk to the captain? Get ahead of the issue? What if she made a complaint? He felt like he had taken advantage of the situation. The massage had crossed a line. He hadn't thought of it that way then, but now, looking back, it seemed obvious. She had been at sea for months, alone. It was quite the disaster. Suddenly there was a knock at the door. Could it be the first mate coming to confront him? He opened the door and was surprised to see Fiona standing there, leaning against the frame, just like she had that morning, ages ago. "Well, sailor, are you going to invite me in?" she asked, a playful smile on her face. What could he say? Of course he would let her in. It wouldn't be good for anyone to see her standing outside. Of course. "Yes, come in." She stepped inside carrying a six-pack of beer. Where had she gotten that? I convinced Pierre to part with this, she said, lifting the pack. Let's just say it took some convincing. Now he won't wonder about certain royal secrets. Look, Fiona, I think we need to talk. He started. What you really need, young man, is a beer. God knows I do. It's tough work. All that exercising, right? She handed him a can, popped one open for herself, and settled onto his bunk. Ah, first beer in months. This is fantastic, she sighed after sipping it. What a treat. A little gift from Hugh. She took another sip, then looked at him thoughtfully. Come on, Brett. Open that beer. Live a little. It's a celebration of life. That phrase again. He glanced at his can of Heineken. He remembered when Pierre had bought cases of it at their last stop. He suspected not much was left now. Shrugging, he opened his can and raised it in a toast toward her. You ran off. Honestly, I fell asleep for a while. I wasn't sure how to talk after that. But we need to discuss this. I think you're being too hard on yourself. I came after you. Sure, the massage was a bold move, but I made the effort too. Don't forget that. You still have your dignity, she added with a grin. That doesn't really change things, Fiona. You're married, Brett replied firmly. Oh, is that what's bothering you? She said casually. Brett, do you know how things work with the royals? Have you heard of arranged marriages? What? Brett sat up surprised. This is the 1980s, almost the 1990s. That kind of thing doesn't happen anymore. Fiona laughed, a light, cheerful sound that caught his attention. Her head tilted back, showcasing her graceful neck, which caught his attention. He quickly shook himself out of his distracting thoughts. Well, if you really believe that, I have a bridge I'd like to sell you, she replied playfully. Where I come from, we have something known as the duty. It's something every royal learns from a young age. We enjoy many privileges like money and attention, but there's a price. We must always behave correctly and set a good example. We have to be present at events, meet people, and make sure we keep the public interested in our lives. This is our reality, and we have no way to escape it. We're born into this role, and we don't really get a say in it. There are many choices we miss out on. I can't just marry anyone. It has to be someone the court will accept. Yes, it sounds old-fashioned, but that's how it is. The British nobility still exists, unlike in France. So all these customs are still part of our lives, no matter how silly they seem today. She took another sip of her drink, her expression showing the seriousness of her words. Look at Diana. I know her well. She supports the charity I was involved with. Headway helps people with head injuries. We've worked together several times. But did Charles truly want to marry her? Yes, but she wasn't his first choice. He wanted Camilla Shand, now Parker Bowles. The Queen didn't approve because Camilla was considered too common. He needed to marry someone of a suitable background, and Diana met that requirement. She's not particularly happy in her marriage, and it seems she expected a fairy tale, which real life doesn't always provide. She has had relationships outside her marriage as well. But the truth is, I can't easily marry for love. I'm not being forced into anything against my will. It's just that my choices are few. My father picked Eric for me. There were about 10 gentlemen who were seen as suitable, and Eric was the best option available. After Hugh, I just had to go along with it. Hugh? Oh, Hugh, she said, taking another drink and sighing. He was the love of my life. We could never marry, though. That would have worried my father and likely shocked my mother. Hugh was charming and taught me about love and even about cricket. Hugh loved cricket a lot. She gazed into the distance, lost in memories. He was so much fun. A real charmer before we met, from what I hear. We were very close. I could see my parents getting more worried about us, if they only knew what he showed me in the stables. And then everything changed. She returned from her thoughts and looked at me. We were supposed to spend the week together. He was dropping off some plans at work. He was an architect, you know. He was excited about our time together, but then he drove too fast. He turned a corner and crashed his car into a truck. He was in a deep sleep for months. When he woke up, he had quite a bit of brain damage. He never lived by himself again and passed away a few years later from the flu. The charity that helped him was Headway, and that's why I was planning to travel around the world. I wanted to raise money for them. I hoped to gather over $500,000, but now I'm not sure what will happen after everything that's happened lately." She sighed and patted the space beside her, inviting Brett to sit with her. After a moment of thinking, he joined her. "Anyway, my marriage was kind of arranged. Eric is a decent guy. He cares more about the family home and the garden than about me most days, to be honest. It's not a passionate romance, but we are British. We just carry on. It feels more like a business partnership than anything else. We are more like friends than anything romantic, if you get what I mean. We share a bed, but it's more about duty than desire. You've heard the saying, lay back and think of England, right? It's more true than you'd expect." They both took a sip of their slightly warm beer, and then she continued thoughtfully. "Don't think you're getting in the way of any grand romance, Brett. I talked to Eric the other night, and also to Daddy. You know what Eric wanted to know? What fish food we use for the aquarium, because he needed to get some more. That was it. He said a few polite things like, 'I'm glad you're okay,' and then started asking about household matters. That's my husband. Daddy was more worried about my health than Eric was. He didn't even ask if I was hurt. He wanted to know where the insurance papers for the boat were." She paused for a moment, taking a deep breath as she calmed down before continuing. "We are far from everywhere, and whatever happens here stays here. I've been on a boat for months all by myself, and I really thought I was going to lose it. I think what we did today was a reaction to that. I'm not here looking for a new romance, just relax. It's all just good, clean fun. No angry husband is going to come looking for you. I'm not going to worry about it, and you shouldn't either. I'm an independent person, and I'm not about to fall for you, and you probably aren't going to fall for me either," she said, giving his hand a reassuring pat. Those were famous last words. Then she kissed him. There was no pause. She took his face in her hands and kissed him passionately. Despite all his thoughts, Brett found himself kissing her back. Suddenly, they were both without their clothes again, but this time, they took their time. Brett enjoyed discovering her, finding joy in each little reaction, whether it was a quiver or a deeper breath. She guided him to explore her body, and he was more than willing to follow. This time, she looked into his eyes, feeling stronger than before. It was different, something special. They shared gentle kisses as he held her close. When they finished, she covered him with tender kisses, and then tears slipped down her cheeks. He comforted her, holding her closely, soothing her, and repeating that everything would be okay. This time, they shared a deeper connection. Afterward, they fell asleep, still wrapped up together. Brett smiled to himself as Fiona slept peacefully, and for the first time, she truly felt that everything would be all right. They slept through the night, and Brett woke early, careful to untangle himself without waking her. He chuckled softly as Fiona stirred, looking around in a sleepy daze before drifting back to sleep. He got dressed and headed to the kitchen to prepare breakfast, ignoring the playful teasing from his shipmates. They couldn't possibly know how right they were about his situation, and he chose not to share that with them. Carrying 2 plates filled with bacon, eggs, toast, and 2 cups of coffee, he returned to his cabin and quietly slipped inside, checking that no one was around. "Is that for me?" asked a sleepy Fiona, sniffing the air as she propped herself up on one arm. "Just for you, of course," Brett said, placing the plates on the small table. "A breakfast fit for a queen." "Well, I've seen what queens eat for breakfast," Fiona replied playfully, "and it usually has more yogurt and granola and a lot less greasy bacon." Brett glanced at his breakfast with a slight frown, then back at Fiona. "That said, it smells amazing." She jumped out of bed looking beautiful and carefree. "Yes, please, serve it up." She slipped on one of his shirts and sat across from Brett, eagerly starting her breakfast while talking about her childhood and school, sharing stories of the breakfasts they had there between bites. Brett couldn't help but admire how effortlessly charming she was, the shirt slightly open. Fiona seemed completely at ease, chatting away as she ate, taking small bites and always using her knife and fork, even for toast. And then, they brought out this tiny birthday cake. Honestly, the saddest thing I've ever seen. We all had to sing happy birthday in our nightgowns, and eventually she noticed he wasn't eating and paused, looking at him curiously. "What?" He hesitated, realizing he had been caught staring, then quickly focused on his own breakfast. "No, what? What were you looking at?" Fiona pressed. You can't just stare like that and not tell me. Brett mumbled with a mouthful of egg, continuing to eat and trying to change the subject. What? You've never seen someone like me at breakfast before? Come on, just tell me, she encouraged, leaning over the table to look at him closely. What? Is my brave sailor starting to feel something? She joked, emphasizing the word feel. Brett felt his face turn red and glanced up at her, hoping for help. Oh my gosh, you are, she exclaimed. Brett is feeling something. Brett put down his utensils and, gathering himself, met her teasing gaze. Brett, this is like a brief moment. Don't get all sentimental on me, she said, leaning back with a serious look. Look, it's easier for you to keep your feelings separate than it is for me. I'm on a boat all alone with no one around and then you show up. You're pretty amazing, and I'm just trying to sort out how I really feel. Fiona's expression softened. Oh, aren't you just sweet? She said with a warm smile. She reached out and took his hand. You think it's been tough for you? I've been on that boat for months. It's been a while since I felt anything like this. You've made me feel more than I have in a long time. And I'm not exactly free, you know? That says a lot. She spoke casually as if discussing something trivial, and Brett was still adjusting to her straightforward way of talking about serious topics. I barely know you, though, he said softly, trying to express himself without sounding too emotional. What if this is a big mistake? I'm really struggling with you being married. I don't know if this is right or not anymore. Let it be what it is. If you want to know more about me, just ask, she said, picking up her coffee and resting her elbows on the table. Ask anything, and mostly an open book. Brett shrugged. He figured it was best to go along with it, so he did. They spent the rest of the morning in the cabin simply talking. She shared about her life in the royal household and what it involved, while he shared his background, his upbringing, and the choices that led him to work on the ship. They laughed and exchanged stories, including some sad ones. She recounted her early experiences with sailing, starting on the River Orwell, and moving up to larger boats from places like Harwich and Felixstowe. She spoke of how sailing alone brought her peace, explaining how her husband had no interest in joining her on those adventures, which took her to places like Kent, Ostend in Belgium, Dunkirk in France, Rotterdam, and Amsterdam. Eventually, she sailed across the Atlantic as part of a crew on an old sailing ship, and then returned with a new yacht from Miami along with a small crew. For 2 summers, she sailed her little boat around Europe and even made a trip to Africa before preparing for her big adventure. She spent months organizing charity support, finding places to dock along her journey, and gathering supplies, all while her husband paid little attention and chose not to be involved. After a while, they had lunch, went to the gym, and strolled around the decks. Fiona was eager to get a tour of the engine room, which caused noticeable frustration for the Scottish lead engineer. Brett couldn't figure out why he was upset. Maybe it was because she was British, a noble, or perhaps it was just because she was a woman. No one felt close enough to the engineer to ask. Despite that, Fiona got her tour since the other engineers were eager to show her around, making it easy for them to be close in the narrow engine room. Despite the obvious sighs and eye rolls from the chief engineer, Fiona managed to charm the crew, who were soon competing to explain every valve and switch to her. For about 10 minutes, she nodded thoughtfully, asked questions, and smiled often. Brett soon realized what she was doing. She was playing the role of the royal visitor, as she later explained. She was giving the same kind of polite attention as if she were opening a village fair or touring a new factory, simply showing interest to make everyone feel appreciated. It was the kind of thing the British royal family did best. Brett stood back, arms folded, trying not to laugh as he watched her go through this routine. Every so often she'd glance his way, catching his eye and daring him to crack a smile. When the tour finally wrapped up, Fiona gave friendly waves, shook hands, and thanked everyone warmly. As they walked back to her cabin, Brett could barely hold back his laughter, and the moment the door shut behind them, he burst into a deep laugh, which Fiona quickly joined. "I'm sorry," he managed to say between laughs. "I know I shouldn't, but the way you were charming them, it was just too funny." "Charming them, you say?" Fiona asked, wiping a tear from her eye as she sat down on the bed. "I'm glad you enjoyed it, though I don't think they minded either." "Definitely not. You've got quite the touch," Brett replied, sitting on the small stool by the desk. With a grin, Fiona raised her eyebrows playfully. Glad to be of service then. A bit of charm can go a long way. They shared a laugh, each grateful for the light-hearted break in the day. Fiona looked over at him, her eyes sparkling with humor. Brett smiled back, and they continued their friendly chat, enjoying each other's company as they shared stories and eased into the evening, thankful for the laughter and camaraderie they'd found in each other's presence. Brett felt like he was finally getting over his tough times and was ready to enjoy life again, especially when it came to being active. Around 9 o'clock, after struggling to get out of bed for the 5th time, he made his way to the kitchen to find something to eat. He received a hard look from Pierre but managed to grab some chicken sandwiches, a couple of sodas, and a bag of chips, which Fiona called crisps. They sat together at a small table, joking and teasing each other, quickly turning to your mother jokes. To Brett's surprise, Fiona had quite a few of these jokes up her sleeve. When he asked her about it, she shrugged, her mouth full of chips. She explained that her school had its own special habits, and that a good sense of humor and a talent for remembering jokes were important. Once they finished their snacks, Brett stood to leave. Fiona looked at him with curiosity, and he smiled at her, saying, "I honestly don't think I can keep going. You've used up all my jokes for now. I need some rest, my lady." She smiled brightly and said, "It's okay, I just hoped," and patted the bed she had moved to. "Will you stay?" she asked, with hope in her voice. "I don't know if that's a good idea," he replied, thinking about whether anyone would come looking for him. It would not be a good situation if he wasn't found in his own bunk. "Please," she pleaded, patting the bed again. "I'd really like to wake up next to you. Come on, you know you want to. There could be an emergency during the night, and wouldn't you want to be here for that?" He could guess what kind of emergency she had in mind based on how the afternoon had gone. Brett hesitated. She was really charming and seemed to want him around. Plus, he hadn't had any other offers lately. "Please," she urged, sensing he was unsure. "Fine," he said, rolling his eyes, pretending he was doing her a big favor. "But I better be knighted when we dock," he joked as he took off his shirt and pants. Waking up in the morning was eye-opening for Brett. While he had done it before, it was usually after brief encounters. He had one longer relationship with an old friend from school that lasted a few months, but she had made it clear she did not like his job as a merchant mariner, and that had ended things. Sharing a small bed next to someone meant being very close. He felt her hand resting on his chest as she breathed softly. He turned his head slightly to see without disturbing Fiona and noticed that the blanket had slipped down. Soft light came in through the porthole, illuminating her smooth skin. She looked peaceful and innocent, even though he knew better. He thought to himself that he could get used to this. That thought could be risky. Then she opened her eyes and saw him right away. She smiled at him, a simple, genuine smile. It showed only joy at seeing him first when she woke up. There were no hidden feelings, just happiness. Something changed in Brett. Looking into her eyes became the most important thing to him. In that moment he felt lost, but he didn't mind. They looked at each other for what seemed like a long time. Eventually Fiona yawned and stretched. "What do we have planned for today?" she mumbled. Suddenly Brett moved closer and kissed her, feeling an urgent need to express his feelings right then. Fiona was surprised but went along with it, breaking the kiss after a moment, a little breathless. "Well, someone is eager. Good morning to you," she beamed, her eyes sparkling. "I'm sorry, Brett replied, feeling shy and realizing he had crossed a line. "Oh no, keep going," Fiona insisted. "This is a lovely way to start the day. More, please." So he kissed her again, and she kissed him back. They shared a feeling that neither of them could explain. They spent most of the morning together. In the following days, Fiona began to brighten up the ship and charm the crew. One day, she organized a scavenger hunt, splitting the crew into teams of 3 and sending them to find items from A to Z within 2 hours. They gathered in the mess hall for the results, where she awarded a case of beer she had charmingly gotten from Pierre. She also hosted a movie night where they watched some old videotapes and made funny comments together, like a clever version of a popular show. One evening, Brett surprised her with dinner on the deck, setting the table as far forward as he could. They sat together, enjoying their meal while watching the water and the sun set, raising their drinks in a toast. Another evening, she created her version of a popular game show, where ordinary people tried to do experts' jobs after seeing them once. She had the crew trying to change a filter in the kitchen, make a soufflé, and even learn a few ballet moves. It was all quite silly, and many of the crew ended up laughing and having fun together. Brett was amazed at how she got everyone involved in such activities. Fiona had a straightforward way about her, mixed with a playful attitude, that made it clear she expected you to do what she wanted, and she knew just how to nudge you into it. Brett was still working a few shifts, and one evening when he returned to his cabin, he found Fiona wearing one of his shirts, leaning out with a bottle of wine. She winked at him and said, "Hey, sailor, see anything you like?" Their time together changed from quick and intense to slow and meaningful. There were gentle touches, whispers of happiness, sweet names for each other, playful smiles, shared jokes, and a disagreement about her not wanting to speak to her husband on the radio again. Brett found it surprising that he was the one telling her she needed to communicate. He saw the irony in that. They shared tired moments, silly fun, comforting closeness, and deeper connections. The night before they were set to dock in Hong Kong, as Brett stood watch on the bridge, the first mate caught his eye and jokingly said, "I'm sure you have better things to do," with a knowing smile. Brett suddenly realized the rest of the crew knew about his relationship with Fiona. His face turned red, and just as he was about to leave, the first mate put a hand on his shoulder and said, "I know it's good now, but remember she's leaving in 2 days. This won't last. Be careful with your heart. It could get hurt." Brett wasn't ready for that conversation. He didn't know the first mate well enough to share his feelings. Plus, he was unsure of how he felt himself. So he just nodded and said, "Yes, sir," before leaving the bridge. Instead of going back to his cabin right away, Brett strolled on the main deck, stopping at the front to look out at the dark water, trying to sort through his thoughts. He knew this was just a short, happy moment, right? Absolutely. He was a professional sailor. She was from a prominent family. There was no future in this. She was lovely, smart, funny, and made him feel great about himself. But part of that was likely just excitement he had helped rescue her. And of course, she felt grateful. He could easily walk away from it, right? Except, she was just so lovely and so much fun. He had to admit, he would miss her when she was gone. Well, he would miss their time together. Who wouldn't? That was expected. But that was all it was. Just a summer fling, a temporary connection while at sea. That's all it was. He didn't love her, not really, right? Ugh. Brett let out a long sigh. He tried hard not to lie to himself. The truth was, they hadn't just been spending time together. They had been connecting in a deeper way, looking into each other's eyes, doing little things for each other just because they knew it would make the other one happy. Great. Brett knew all of this, but he wasn't ready to admit it. He also knew he couldn't let himself feel this way. She was leaving soon. She was married after all, and she wouldn't feel the same about him. She had her responsibilities. She had a husband. She had her life. Even worse. Should he tell her how he felt? Would it even matter? Still, wasn't life about being true to oneself? Not really. Brett felt torn inside, unsure of what to do or say. Should he say anything at all? Then, while he leaned on the railing and stared out at the sea, he felt her arm link with his and noticed her warm presence beside him. "Penny for your thoughts? Or since you're American, maybe $1? He breathed in her scent. Even without perfume, Fiona smelled fresh and clean. "Just thinking," he said. "Yes, I figured that out. Why else would you be staring so seriously at the ocean? Are you trying to look deep for a music video?" Her humor always managed to lighten even the heaviest moments. He smiled and turned to her. "Just pondering the meaning of it all, my lady." She tilted her head and looked up at him, her gaze steady. "Yes, you are. Well, don't let me interrupt." Then she leaned against the railing, looking out at the sea, thinking about the future. He took a moment to breathe. Then she quietly said, "Yes, I love you too." Brett was taken aback, speechless for a moment. They stood in silence as he tried to figure out what to say. Finally, he broke the quiet. "Yeah, Here's the thing, Fiona." She turned to him and said with passion, "Brett, I know you feel it too. I know we both shouldn't, but I do, and you do too, and that's just how it is. Soon I'll have to go back to my life, and you'll sail away, and we'll both have to deal with our hearts feeling heavy." She took a breath. "I never wanted this to happen, and I'm pretty sure you didn't either. It's become more than I expected. But here we are, and we need to recognize it." They fell back into silence as Brett struggled to find the right words. "If you don't say something soon, I'm going to push you into the water. Don't make me share my feelings and then just turn away," she warned. "I really don't know what to say, Fiona," Brett replied, looking at her. A gentle breeze was lifting her hair, and he reached out to tuck it behind her ear. She took his hand and lightly pressed it against her cheek. "What do you want to hear? Do you want me to say I care about you? I care about you. There, I said it. I care about you. And I'm a sailor, while you're from a high society. We come from different worlds that don't usually mix." Brett's voice sounded fragile at the end, and he looked away. "Yeah, it's so unfair, isn't it?" Fiona said with a hint of sarcasm. "You might say that," Brett replied with bitterness. "I don't know how to deal with this either, Brett," Fiona said softly. "I have to return to a marriage I don't truly want. I have to go back to a life of responsibilities. These few days with you feel like a special moment in my life. I wouldn't call it a vacation, considering what I went through to be here. But I'd do it all over again, just for these days with you." She moved closer to him, wrapping his arm around her and fitting herself against him. "And don't say you wouldn't too. At the end of the day, are we better for this? For these feelings? Or worse? I choose to believe we're better. I have something to compare my life to now. You've made me feel things I've never felt before, things I never thought I would." Silence fell between them again. Instead of struggling for words, Brett was simply enjoying the moment. He held his arm around her, looking out at the vast ocean. "The thing is," she started to say, then paused. "You know this has to end, right? I have responsibilities. I need to go back to my life. There's no future for us. I wish there was, but there isn't." She paused again. "And I think we should make a clean break after this," she said. She turned to look him in the eyes, wanting him to understand. "We need to make this quick and straightforward, like pulling off a Band-Aid," she added. He looked at her with confusion. "Oh, I mean a plaster?" He nodded, understanding what she meant. "No following each other. You go on with your life, and he'll go on with mine, and we don't look back." She touched his chest with each word to emphasize her point. "You can't show up in England, and I won't show up where you are. Promise me, Brett. Promise me you'll move on. Treat the time we shared as something special and never revisit it." Brett just looked at her. "Promise me," she insisted earnestly. "I don't want either of us to regret this, but we have to end it. And have an agreement." Brett turned away and leaned on the railing, nodding without looking at her. It wasn't what he wanted, but he understood her point. They were too different. Finally, he said, "You've made it hard for me to connect with anyone else. I'm serious. How will I ever find someone like you again?" "I think so too," she replied, smiling a little. Then she stepped closer and leaned in to give him a quick kiss. "I'm unique, and don't you forget it." They kissed again, and it felt more intense. She pulled away, her cheeks a bit red, and said, "Let's head back to the cabin. We have one more day together. Let's enjoy it." Taking his hand, she led him down the deck back to their cabin. "The last time I saw your mother, she was walking down the gangplank, wrapped in a scarf and wearing big sunglasses. She looked like she was stepping off a grand yacht, instead of having just managed to escape a tough situation days earlier." Brett sighed as the memory came back to him. "I couldn't even go with her. They wanted to avoid any problems, you see. Like everyone else, I watched from above, just a face in the crowd. She looked around at the bottom, searching for me, but there was no way she would have recognized me. There were many photographers there, more than you'd expect in a Chinese port. I think the media from the UK sent some people. Of course, she made a show for them. That was the last time I saw her in person. Later that day, a man came by in a car to collect her things. We stayed in port for 2 full weeks, much longer than usual. The company's leaders and chairman came to help manage the media. When the excitement faded, we finally left port, heading for New Zealand. Brett tried to take another drink from his empty bottle. Glancing suspiciously at it, he set it down and looked at his children. He finished his thought, saying, I spent the next 15 years sailing around the world. I became a first mate before I settled here. I followed your mother's life for about 6 months. Your media sure seemed to be everywhere. After 6 months of feeling lost and finding out she was expecting you to, well, I couldn't handle it anymore. So I let go. I let her live the life she chose. I understand she didn't have many options, but still, she was the greatest love of my life. Those 10 days spoiled me for everything afterward. I tried to make things work with other women, but they just weren't the same. I knew the problem was with me, but what could I do? He paused, looking out at the sea. Then I met Caroline, who felt as lost and disappointed as I did. She had her own story and challenges to face, just like I did. We came together and built a life, giving each other space to mourn our losses. And here I am. Then you showed up, which didn't help, he said with a sad smile. The kids listened as he finished his thoughts, looking at each other with understanding. She didn't forget you either. So many things made sense after Dad passed away. She sat us down to share her side of the story. Growing up, our bedrooms were all about the sea. We had little model ships and planes to build. All of ours were merchant ships. We didn't understand it until now, Amelia said, reaching for Brett's hand. Yeah, Bradley agreed. Every other holiday, we'd go on a cruise. She would relax on the balconies of our suites, sipping tea and gazing out at the ocean. She always said the sea brought her peace. I think she was reminiscing about the past once you shared your story. Another pause followed, and then Brett asked carefully, How? How is she? Does she ever? He trailed off, looking down, worried about the answer. She's fine. A bit older, but she always took good care of herself. She's still pretty lively at 46. Did you know we're the exact same age she was when she met you? Brett stared at Amelia, and the silence grew uncomfortable. Bradley shifted and then said, Actually, now that Dad is gone, she's chosen to step back from public life. She held her title for a long time. Was? Brett asked, looking over at Bradley. Yes, she gave up her title and passed it on. Saying she's retiring from public life means she has let go of the title. So you are now the Duke? Brett asked. Yes, I was born 12 minutes before Millie, so now I am in charge, His Grace, the Duke of Ipswich. Bradley said simply. Am I supposed to call you my lord or bow or something? Brett asked, pursing his lips. It was time to see if his kids shared his sense of humor. Well, technically, Amelia began. Yeah, I remember us having a little disagreement with your people so we wouldn't have to bow and all that, Brett said with a smirk. Yes, well, that's true, Amelia responded, a hint of embarrassment in her voice. Bradley smiled, clearly enjoying her discomfort, as siblings often do. Another quiet moment passed. So, where do we go from here? Brett asked as he stood up to grab another drink. You came to see me, and now I know you exist. What's next? Well, Amelia said, sharing a glance with Bradley, we hope to get to know you. It would be nice to learn about our family history. Are there any uncles, aunts, or cousins we can meet? Amelia asked, feeling hopeful. Sadly, no. I'm an only child. My parents passed away when I was 17, so it's just me now, Brett replied. That's not true anymore, Amelia said with a smile, and Brett felt a strong emotion inside him. She reminded him so much of her mother. Isn't that a bit strange? A long-lost dad showing up from the U.S.? Won't that affect your titles? Brett asked, leaning back in his chair after handing a drink to each of his children. His mind was starting to connect the dots. His children. What a thought. I hope you can understand, Dad. We can't just admit this. When it comes to titles, this kind of situation is part of the royal family, along with crowns and ceremonies. I mean anyone who thinks that Harry is really Charles's biological son. Amelia paused as she saw Bradley shaking his head. Anyway, she continued, trying to refocus, if this becomes known, the palace will issue a denial, and that will be the end of it. Unless there's a DNA test, it won't go any further. They're really good at ignoring things like this, so as long as we don't draw attention to it, we should be fine. That means, Bradley added, we can't officially recognize you, Dad. We don't want to create any drama. Both of us would rather not highlight what happened with Mom all those years ago, and I don't think she would want that either. I hope you're not looking to make this a big event. If I wanted that, do you think I would have let your mother leave? Brett replied, a bit defensively. No, that's true. I understand, Amelia said softly. But it is a big deal to me, Brett admitted quietly. Yes, we can imagine, Amelia said. We spent the whole flight talking about it, wondering who you are and going over Mom's notes again and again. Thankfully, you're everything we hoped for. Right, Brad? Definitely, Bradley agreed, nodding. Great taste in drinks, too, he added, raising his almost empty bottle. That's nice to hear, but I should warn you. I really don't know how to be a dad. I never thought I'd be in this position. Don't worry, we'll help you through it, Amelia said, reaching out to hold his hand once more. One thing, though, even though our father wasn't really around much, he did his best. So please don't speak badly of him. That would make it hard for us to be around you, and we don't want that. Honestly, your dad was a good man. I'm just a bit envious that he had you and your mother for so long, Brett said strongly. I have nothing but respect for him. After a moment, he gently asked, Do you think he knew? To be honest, he wasn't very involved with the family, Amelia replied. I don't think he really knew what to do as a father. But like Millie said, he did try his best. He tried to guide us, having the talks he thought we needed. He always attended music recitals and similar events, but his true talent was in managing the estate. He was great with animals, so I wouldn't be surprised if he noticed the difference in our eyes. If he did, he never mentioned it or loved us any less. For that alone, he deserves our respect, said Bradley thoughtfully. To the Duke, said Brett, lifting his bottle. May a good man rest in peace. Here, here, agreed Amelia, and they all raised their bottles. They took a long drink and sat quietly, each lost in their own thoughts. So, are you in town for long? What does your mother think about you visiting me? Asked Brett, trying to fill the quiet space. Well, since we are now the royal representatives, we need to head back soon. Mother has moved into one of the small cottages on the estate. It's up to us now. Plus, I have my practice to return to, Amelia replied. Practice? Brett asked, curious. Yes, I'm a solicitor. I'm in my first year at a local firm. I do a lot of volunteer work, helping with local land trusts and similar projects. Brad is now the lord of the manor, and his job is to oversee the duchy, she explained. But, Bradley added, we want to invite you to visit. Have a little holiday with us and see our lives. We'd also like to come visit you for some time, if that's okay. Brett shrugged. Sure, of course. I just don't want it to be awkward with your mother. They exchanged a thoughtful look. Dad, said Amelia carefully, I know Mum was very special to you. She has chosen to step back from public life for now. She lost her husband, and she wants to be more private for a while. This is common in our circles. To do this, she plans to go away for a while. Amelia seemed to search for the right words, glancing at her brother for support. Bradley nodded, sympathetic to her explanation. She has decided to take a cruise. She mentions having lovely memories from the sea. As she spoke, Amelia focused on Brett, gauging his reaction. For 6 months around the world, she booked a nice suite on the ship with 2 bedrooms, a private deck, and a steward to help her. The whole experience, she finished. Okay, Brett replied, a bit confused. And it leaves in 2 days. From San Diego. A sudden silence filled the room as Brett's eyes widened and realization struck him. She's here? He exclaimed, quickly standing up. Now? Amelia smiled at Bradley and then beamed at her father. A hotel downtown, the Coronado. We're staying there too. Brett looked around in disbelief. She wants to see me? Me? Well, as long as you have your passport, I think the plan was for you to join her. You don't have anything else going on, right? Brett sank back into the chair. This is real, right? She's really here? Amelia nodded excitedly. And waiting for you. If you want, Dad. She's here, Brett whispered to himself. I need to pack, close up the house. Do you think it would be okay if I just showed up? What should I wear? He was speaking quickly now. Amelia glanced at Bradley, who was also smiling widely. I think it would be more than okay, Dad. Brett stood nervously outside the hotel room door. 23 years. He'd seen many places and faced many challenges, but the thought of seeing her filled him with both excitement and fear. He raised his hand to knock, but just as he was about to, the door opened. There she was, a bit older but still the same woman. The same eyes, the same soft skin, a few lines around her face, but the same warm smile. Just seeing her made his heart race. "Hello, sailor. Ready to pick up where we left off?" In his mind, Brett thought, "Yes, I've been waiting for this moment." Hey, everyone. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of the exciting stories we have coming up. What do you think about the characters in this story? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.